This video was going to be a light-hearted story of how Richard Sandrak, or Little Hercules, got into such impressive shape at just 8 years old. However, the more I looked into it, the more I was disturbed by the dark secrets that I found.
When Richard turned 11, his father went to prison for domestic violence.
He mixed Anavar in each of his shakes. Who knows how much?
First impression is, how does a 6-year-old get into that kind of shape?
Richard's story is not a light-hearted one, with allegations of abuse, steroids, and so much worse. But to begin, we start at Richard's early life, which may give us some warning signs of what was to come. Richard was born in Ukraine to parents Pavel and Lena in 1992, and although they were content with their lives in the country, the family were much more ambitious than that. They decided to uproot their lives and move the Sandraks to the United States, eventually settling in Pennsylvania, which for better or worse would change their lives forever. Pavel was already a world champion in Taekwondo, and his mother was an aerobics competitor, so clearly their family were driven and knew what it took to become a world champion, and as such, pushed this lifestyle onto Richard, who they potentially saw as their last chance to live the American dream. At age 3, Richard began training. He apparently lifted weights because of the enjoyment he gained from it, with his mother stating that there was no parental pressure to start lifting. By age 5, he was training for multiple hours every single day, completing hundreds of push-ups and sit-ups. He wasn't allowed to eat any junk food, eating mainly lima beans and protein shakes to maintain his muscle and low body fat. The family don't see this as strange behavior, but that's probably because his training and lifestyle only got worse. Even at his young age, Richard was making impressive progress in the gym, and in order to continue making this progress and craft the perfect physique, his father went to extreme measures. He forced Richard to sleep on the ground without a mattress, as he believed this would improve his already perfect physique. If Richard got something incorrect or acted out of order, he would be forced to repeat tough exercises until Pavel deemed that he'd learned his lesson. There were no toys in the home, he'd never seen a playground, and he was rarely allowed outside. Unfortunately, Richard probably saw all of this as normal parenting, due to the fact that he wasn't allowed to mix with other kids until the age of 10, being homeschooled by his militant parents. Because of this tough upbringing and strict regime, Richard made insane progress, as at just 8 years old, he looked like this. He was bench pressing 80 kilograms or 180 pounds, and much to the delight of his father, becoming very skilled in Taekwondo. It's been said that pound for pound, Richard was the strongest person in the world at the time, and it seemed as Pavel thought they were wasting his potential staying in Pennsylvania, so he looked west towards California, seeing movie stars and celebrities living in the Golden State, and decided that this would be the way forward. And this move turned out to be great for the business side of their life, as despite Pavel being a world champion himself, he knew he needed help molding Richard into a real star, fit for the silver screen. And this help came in the form of Frank Jardina, the owner of a gym Richard used to go to and personal trainer of massive celebrities such as Jennifer Lawrence and Elton John. Frank saw Richard's skills and could see the future of his impressive abilities. On Frank's website, he prides himself on creating Richard Sandrak, aka Little Hercules, and that's because essentially he did. Frank kept Richard's abilities secret for months, quietly training his physique, his stage presence, and more, until the event which would change Richard's life forever. At the age of just 8 years old, in the year 1999, Richard performed his first Little Hercules routine at an NPC bodybuilding show in Las Vegas, and what followed can only be described as a media frenzy. Anyone who grew up in the early 2000s will almost certainly remember seeing this guy at some point, as it seems like almost every single news outlet was reporting on this 8-year-old boy who could outlift grown men, and people really couldn't get enough of him. He was appearing in talk shows, news articles, and more. Frank, Pavel, and probably Richard were all loving all of this attention that his physique was getting him. It got to the point where Hollywood producers were seeing the potential in Richard, and even got him to star in the Young Tarzan movie, which must have been a dream come true for the family. Unfortunately, this movie was never released, but this movie staying unreleased would be the least of the family's worries, as the family's dream of living the high life in Hollywood would soon turn into a nightmare, as the true personality of his father would be shown. At this point, it is around 2003, and Richard is sort of at the peak of his popularity, pulling in thousands of dollars every single month through appearances and sponsors, all of which was being paid directly to his father, Pavel, who would sort out the finances and keep it safe for the family. Pavel seemed to change with this newfound fame though, and it was noticeable to those around him. After trying and failing to launch his own fitness supplement, he would push Richard harder and harder, seeing him as his way into the American dream. Frank Jardina noticed this though and pushed back against Pavel, with Frank saying Pavel's treatment of his son was bordering on criminal. After this falling out, Pavel threatened to kill Frank, which led Frank to walking away from the project entirely. And if you thought that was bad, it was about to get a lot worse, as Pavel would take his anger out on Richard's mother. During an altercation one night, Pavel would be arrested for abuse when Richard was just 11 years old. During a disagreement with Richard's mother, Lena, Pavel presumably lost his temper and broke Lena's wrist and her nose. The worst part about this is that Richard was the one who made the call to police to get his father to stop attacking his mother, even asking the police to come quietly and not use sirens because he was terrified about how his father would respond. This clearly affected Richard, and it led him to basically give up bodybuilding for years. He still trained on and off and kept his aspiration to be a movie star, but his physique became noticeably less impressive and he started to just look like a normal kid. After his father was arrested, he reunited with Frank as a coach and created his first major movie called Little Hercules 3D, which starred Hulk Hogan as Zeus and was one of the movies of all time. This was unsurprisingly a flop, and it really sparked Richard's fall into obscurity, along with the fading impressiveness of his physique. While growing up in his mid-teens, he was still in shape and did get some interviews from people catching up with him, but the dream of starring in a massive Hollywood hit had all but disappeared. Forum posts from the time Richard was popular show that there was one question that has always been on people's minds, with this post in particular summing it up. If this is not a hoax, or he is not a genetic freak, I shudder to think about what his parents may be slipping into his grape juice and cookies. And this is one claim which has been ever present in Richard's life. Medical professionals from around the world have all claimed that to gain this much muscle at that age, he had to have had steroid levels which simply aren't present in a boy. Although his mother has constantly denied these claims, it has not convinced everyone of their innocence. It seems like when Richard's father got arrested for abuse was when Richard's physique started to get less impressive and he became less driven, which begs the question, does this mean he was really giving Richard steroids, and when he went away, so did the unnatural muscle growth? Derek from More Plates, More Dates, an expert on performance enhancing drugs, seems to think this might be the case.
But yeah, like I definitely could see the Anavar being a plausible, thing that was occurring, being mixed Anavar in each of his shakes. Who knows how much, but that definitely seems realistic to me.
And it wasn't just Derek, with others on Reddit pointing out that when Richard was heading into his mid-teens and was back training hard for a movie role, he looked like this, having clear gyno in his nipples, which is a sign of steroid usage. Despite this, Richard and his mother continue to both deny the claims, but commenters still speculated whether it was true or not. Whatever happened to being a kid? I shudder to think where he will be in 15 years. That comment was made in 2003, and now almost 22 years later, this is how Richard Sandrak has turned out. He no longer trains, and when he does, it is a few meager chin-ups and some running up and down stairs. His dream of being a Hollywood star seems to have faded, as he currently works as a stuntman in the Waterworld section of Universal Studios. Richard is reportedly very proud of his past, but has ambitions which would take him on a very different trajectory in life, and given his past exploits, seems very random.
If you could have your dream job today, what would it be?
Quantum scientist. For more specifically, maybe even an engineer for NASA.
Since this interview, he hasn't had much of a digital footprint. He doesn't post consistently anywhere, except on one recent Instagram account that I was able to find. Under the username Pokerino, he seems to have started making poker content, even getting the different suits tattooed on his leg. I can't 100% confirm that this is him, but given the only image he posted was of himself, I think it's a safe assumption. Whether Richard was given steroids or not, it is undeniable that his childhood was stolen by his father, who clearly saw Richard as his golden ticket into the glamour of Hollywood and didn't care about the price he had to pay to get there. So it is refreshing to see Richard living a somewhat normal life at the end of it. Little Hercules was called the strongest boy in the world, but if you want to be shocked as to what happened to the strongest family in the world after almost a decade of training, click the video that's on your screen now, and I'll see you in the next one.
And so highly recommend you go and follow Big Craig, 31,000 followers.